Holger Sommerfeld. I'm a professor at IUBH since 5 years. Before that, I worked for a large media company and I was responsible for several change projects. And that's why we're here. We're talking today about change management. Let's start with our first unit, organizational change. What do I want you to learn today? First of all, I want you to understand what organizational change is about. What is it really, this organizational change? Then I want you to realize that all organizations need to change. No matter if small or large, they need to change to survive. And finally, we're going to take a look at why and that actually change is difficult and why it's so difficult. So what organizational change is not first, and what this class is not about. It's not about personal change. So it's not about you as a person changing. That would be more the domain of psychology, of leadership, and we're not talking about this mainly here. It's also not about creating new enterprises or new organizations. That would be more the domain of entrepreneurship, innovation, etc. Instead, we're really focusing here on what is happening inside existing organizations, what is happening in their environment, and how do environment and the organization react together. Environment changes, organization changes. So that means organizational change is obviously something to do with organizations. So what are organizations? Let's take a little example. Let's say you want to play tennis and you just can't afford to build your own tennis court. Shouldn't be so. So organizations in this case are you form a club, you find other people that would like to play tennis, and then you finance a tennis court together. So you have a shared objective and you form this organization, in this case the club, to achieve this objective together. That's what organizations are. And obviously, if you take a large company that is a for-profit company like Volkswagen, that's also an organization. And its objectives are to build good cars for a mass market worldwide. Of course, it's on a different scale, but it's the same type of organization. And the church. Just to give you another example, also the church is an organization, and also the church obviously needs to change over time. So organizations really are social entities made up of people and formed to achieve collective goals. Now, those tasks that organizations perform, they try to perform them routinely and thriving for efficiency. That will be a second characteristic. And now what does it mean to actually change those organizations? Change there means permanently altering the patterns of organizational behavior, the behavior of the organization. Why? Why do they have to change at all? So we established what it means to change, but why? Actually, the internal and external environment of organizations is constantly changing. We have what is called strategic drift if you keep your old strategy, and if the environment changes, they drift apart. Think about a company like Nokia. Nokia started out with rubber boots, then went into electronic components. From there, they became #1 mobile phone producer in the world, and as of very recently, they fell back from that position and are basically back to just an electronic components manufacturer. A lot of change and a lot of strategic drift in all of this. So why, again, do they need to change? Well, if they don't, their survival is at stake. So organizations need to adapt to a changing environment in order to thrive. Of course, this change in the environment also provides opportunities. To become better in the end is a small step, but an important step, to survival as well. So, survival is the main point that creates the need to change. This summarizes it up. So we have a shifting environment and an environment with elements like competition, customer behavior, politics. All of this can change, as we have seen. Then the company actually has to renew its strategy. No more rubber boots, but electronic components. So new products, new markets, new business models, new ways to earn money. And this you obviously can't do with the same old organization that you have from before. So Nokia surely did not produce its world-class mobile phones with the same people, the same structures, the same culture, the same political landscape that was the company that produced rubber boots. It had to change. And that's the overall picture here. So organizations change to survive. Let's take an example from the automobile industry. You might or might not be surprised, but young people actually drive less. And that is actually getting the automobile industry to think. So there's a survey where they asked, did you make a conscious effort to reduce driving last year? And the answers were by age group. So we have 55 plus here, and the very youngest group up there. Let's take a look at the 55 plus group first. Here, as you can see, you have 8% and 16% who agree. Dark blue basically just means strongly agree, light blue means somewhat agree, and together we get roughly 1/4 of all of the people 55 years and older that want to reduce their driving and that thought about it last year. Now let's take a look at the 18 to 34 group. Here you can already see that it's much, much more. So that's where the group left off the 55s, and in this 18 to 35 group, you actually have almost 45% that don't want to drive as much. When you ask them why, many of them say, well, can't go on Facebook at the same time as I'm driving. So as the car industry, you get a very unusual competitor for time, smartphones. And they actually have to do something about this. They thinking car sharing and many other things, automated driving maybe. We don't know yet what it's going to be because this is ongoing, but it seems pretty obvious that the automobile industry faces some major changes in their environment and has to think about how to react to those changes. And this is not an exception. If you look just in a newspaper and just take a look in today's newspaper, even in your local newspaper, and I will guarantee you that you find in the headlines at least 10 examples of ongoing organizational change. Mergers or takeovers, reported losses that mean that the company has to change definitely in order to survive and change on short notice. Maybe layoffs, reductions in number of people working there. New managers that mean new style of management, and that means changes, and new products. The list can go on. So the key lesson here is there is organizational change everywhere. But is it easy to achieve? That's another important question. Organizational change, unfortunately it seems, is very difficult to achieve. There is John Cotter, who's actually a leading researcher on change and who has written one of the most famous papers on change management in Harvard Business Review. And he found out that only 30% of all change programs actually succeed. And if you take a more recent study, McKinsey, the consulting company, they asked 3,200 executives, almost 3,200, and their answer was only 1 transformation in 3 succeeds. So 1 in 3, if you compare that to the 30% from above, you will notice not much has changed in change management. So in those 12 years, change management seems not to become easier. And we'll have to see why. Also, if you look at 1/3 of all programs only working and a more and more changing environment, what you probably conclude is that companies will not be able to survive very long. And that's actually the case as well. So average life expectancy for a company, if you take the startup, the medium-sized company, the old company, the large company, the successful and not so successful but still surviving, if you take all companies together, what you get is an average life expectancy of about 13 years. And that's not all, because here you have all those startups from those numbers, only a small part survive. You might say that's obvious. But if you look at companies that are already successful, the picture is not much brighter. So a more recent study concluded that the large successful companies that are on the Fortune 500 list, that is by definition the list of the biggest companies in the world, at least the biggest quoted companies in the world, and here it says that they last on this list only about 40 years on average. After that, they disappear. If you look at this in detail, this is from the same study, you see here the Fortune 500 survival rates plotted for different years. It starts with 500 because that's the number of companies remaining on the list in the beginning when you start with this analysis. And then if you just look at the black line here is companies that started with 500 on 1955. And then the black line, if you follow it down here, it shows how years from the start, how after, in this case, 35 years, and that would bring that to about 1990s, from those original 500, only about 160 companies are left. All the others are gone. Now the different colors on this chart here show you different starting points. So if you look at the youngest line, that's the green line actually. Here you see you start out with 500 again in this case 1995, that would be the starting year. And then you go down until about 14 years from there. So you were in about 2009. And in about 2009, there are not much more than 220 companies left out of 500 only 14 years prior. So you clearly see that also the successful companies are not able to stay successful forever. Why is that the case? Why does success not give you better chances of surviving? For one example that might give you some insight about this, we go way back, 1898 now. We're in times where the US Navy just won a major war against the Spanish. And they considered themselves to be the most successful navy in the world. At this time, if you look at an ocean, you have waves, and if you aim with your gun, what you actually have is very imprecise firing. Only 10 in 1,000 or even much less of your shots will actually be on target. And that's when a British armourer invented continuous gunfire. This basically meant that the gun moved with the moving of the waves. And that actually gave it much more precision, actually 3,000% more precision. Now you would say that's an innovation that every organization wants to implement immediately. So when a US Lieutenant Sims learned about this innovation, he wanted to adopt it in the US Navy. Didn't work out. After a long process, the Navy finally fired him instead. Why would that be the case? Why would they resist this seemingly obviously successful innovation? Well, first of all, they said, we don't need it. We're already the best. We just don't need it. And anyway, if we are the best, that would also mean that we would have invented it. The invention also challenges the organization in and by itself. Up to that point, you had a culture in the Navy where it was important to be very courageous, to have great navigational skills. The captain was highly important because he had to navigate the ship very close to the enemy ship so that you could actually fire and hit. And now all of this would be substituted by technology. Everybody would be able to do it. You wouldn't need the old type of captain anymore. And careers are in danger. So people resisted it. The whole organization resisted it. Actually, after Sims made a lot of pressure, they actually said, well, we're going to prove it to you that it's not a great invention. And they said, let's do a test. And you have to imagine that the actual test that they did was on a dry firing range, on land. No movement, no waves. And obviously, no improvement of continuous gunfire. So they just labeled him a crack-brained egotist and got rid of him. So, if we summarize all of this up, what do we get? Turbulent environments force companies to change in order to survive. That's the first thing we learned. Secondly, we said 70% of all organizational change projects fail. The majority fail. And that's still the case. And thirdly, even the largest and most successful firms don't survive forever. They actually drop out of the Fortune 500 list after only about 40 years. So thank you very much, and hope to join you for the next session.